This week on the Communicators, two legislators discuss Congress's role when it comes to cybersecurity issues. Representative Mac Thornberry is the chair of the House Republican Cybersecurity Task Force, and Democratic Representative Jim Langevin is co-founder of the House Cybersecurity Caucus.
And this is C-SPAN's Communicators program. We're continuing our series on cybersecurity and cyber threats to the United States. This week, the congressional response to cybersecurity. Joining us is Representative Mac Thornberry, who serves as chair of the House Republican Task Force on Cybersecurity. Congressman Thornberry, thank you for being here. Jennifer Martinez of Politico is our guest reporter. Congressman, what, in your view, are the cybersecurity needs of the U.S. to defend against? And do you think that the White House plan introduced in May addresses those needs?
Well, the country faces a wide spectrum of threats in cyberspace, all the way from vandalism and petty crime to more serious crime, theft of intellectual property, to things that people are calling cyber warfare. And so it's a wide spectrum of threats. I think the fundamental issue is that our laws and policies have not kept up with the changes in technology. And so, to a large extent, the government is playing catch-up. And that's what I think the White House proposal is trying to address. That's what we're trying to address in Congress, is to try to help update, basically, our laws and policies. I think the White House proposal has some very helpful elements in it. I think it's a good building block for steps that Congress can and should take. It doesn't address all the issues, but we're not going to fix all the issues in a single bill. It's going to take a conversation with the American people. It's going to take I think, an incremental sort of approach. But there are a number of issues that it does not address that I think we need to at least be talking about.
Do you think that cybersecurity legislation can ever keep up with cybersecurity threats, given the fast-moving?
No, and it shouldn't try to. I mean, we cannot have the federal government pass a law that says what the defense needs to do. But we can improve our organization. We can update laws, criminal, our military doctrine, to reflect this new reality that we have national security challenges as well as criminal challenges and other things, economic challenges in cyberspace. So there is no definitive point we'll reach and say, okay, now we're done. That's why this has to be a continual sort of process.
Jennifer Martinez.
So the House is going to tackle cybersecurity legislation in a piecemeal fashion, whereas up in the Senate, they're scrambling to hammer out a single, larger, comprehensive cybersecurity bill by the fall. So since the House is taking this piecemeal approach, are there any bill or bills in particular that you think the House should act on first and you think are particularly important? And then also, do you think it's possible to pass a cybersecurity bill through this Congress?
I do think it is possible to pass legislation in this Congress that will make significant progress in cybersecurity, and that's what the Speaker wants to do. Mm-hmm. And so, but because it is so complex and it touches on at least 9 different committees, he wanted to form a Republican task force to at least begin to lay the groundwork for what the committees would do. And so the work will go through the regular committee process, and as you know, the Speaker feels strongly about that. Mm-hmm. But our hope is this task force can kind of set up the framework from which the committees can operate. And you're right, I think when you have the committees do their job, that means it will be more of a piecemeal because different committees have different pieces of jurisdiction on the cyber issue. And I can't tell you what the final legislative vehicle will be. As you say, the Senate's working towards this big bill. But I hope we don't take an all-or-nothing approach, big bill or nothing. I don't think that would be helpful because there are some parts of cyber that nearly everybody agrees we need to act on. Improving the government's own procurement and cyber practices. There's a legislation called FISMA, for the government's own. And so there are other examples like that. But I think the key is, and what the Speaker wants to do is do something that helps make the country safer in cyberspace.
And so for the task force, Speaker Boehner, Majority Leader Cantor announced the creation of that last month, and they tapped you to lead it, so congratulations.
Condolences.
And Congressman Langevin, though, has been pretty vocal about how this task force is not bipartisan. It's only comprised of Republican members. Do you think that because it's comprised of members from only one party, do you see any obstacles you're going to face because of that, or potential challenges? And then also, can you address that charge from Congressman Langevin about how this is potentially turning cybersecurity into a partisan issue?
Yeah. I don't think it's turning into a partisan issue at all. And Jim certainly is one of the most knowledgeable people in Congress, House or Senate on these issues. And he and I happen to be chair and ranking member of a subcommittee on armed services that has cybersecurity jurisdiction for the Pentagon. We work very well together. And there is no reason for cybersecurity to be a partisan issue. It has not been in the past, and I don't think it will in the future. The Speaker felt, though, that before we moved legislation, that he needed an advisory group, basically, to step back and look at the broader picture of cybersecurity and establish, or at least lay out, some sort of framework from which the committees can do their work. We're not writing legislation in the task force. We're just trying to step back and look at the bigger picture, lay out kind of an approach that seems to make sense from a House Republican standpoint, but then it's going to be up to the individual committees, and there's every expectation and hope that as the committees actually write the bills, it will be completely bipartisan. And of course, in the Armed Services Committee, I guarantee it will, and Jim and I will be working together on cyber legislation there. And the other key thing, the task force has members on it from each of the 9 committees that have significant jurisdiction. And so you get a variety of inputs as you're looking at that bigger picture. And he felt that we needed to do that first.
Congressman Thornberry, as you know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has expressed some concerns about hampering business with regard to this cyber plan. There's also been concerns expressed about privacy issues. Where do you stand on both those fronts?
Well, I think both are very legitimate concerns. If we take action through the government that makes our business less competitive, we will not have been doing the economy or the country any favors. And at the same time, if the government takes action that significantly affects our individual privacy rights in the name of cybersecurity, then we also will have changed the essential fabric of our freedoms. And so it's a little bit like some of the screening mechanisms that we've gone through in the last decade. We're going to have to work our way as a country through it, understanding we'll accept some risk in cybersecurity, but at the same time, we can't leave ourselves just open and vulnerable and exposed to malicious actors in cyberspace. So we need to work with privacy folks, we need to work with business, we need to work with the high-tech community to take these steps I'm talking about, understanding it's not a final answer, but to try to increase our general level of cybersecurity around the country.
Is this only a defense threat, or do you see it as an economic threat as well?
Oh, it's clearly an economic threat. And I can't tell you the numbers. Various people use these gigantic numbers about how much stuff has been stolen from industry. It's intellectual property that is being stolen, and that's American jobs that are being stolen. So there's no doubt that there is an enormous economic element to this, as well as criminal money, as well as a national security element to it. And, of course, that is the primary function, I think, of the federal government.
Jennifer Martinez.
So industry has discouraged Congress from instituting a set of regulations or security standards that they must follow, and instead have advocated for bills to have incentives that reward the private sector for taking steps to better secure their computer systems and networks. So I wanted to So I wanted to see, do you prefer incentives over regulation? And if so, what would possible incentives be? Are we talking tax breaks? Are we talking grants for research and development for businesses?
Well, to me, it's always preferable to encourage somebody to do the right thing rather than to tell them, go do the right thing. If you get their interests aligned with what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to be more successful. And just as we were talking earlier, this is a very difficult area for the federal government to regulate in because it changes so much. But on the other hand, if you can encourage business to make the changes on their own to keep up with the changing threat, then I think you will have accomplished more. Now, there may be some more regulation that's needed. And people most often talk about the nuclear power industry, maybe the electricity grid, as areas that are already fairly regulated, and perhaps additional regulation is needed. So I think we need to look at that. But to me, it makes more sense if you can encourage people to think the same way. And a variety of incentives have been talked about, from tax incentives to liability protection. And others, if you can streamline some of the audits that are already in law, you can offer an enticement for business to improve their cybersecurity and thus remove some of the burden that they face under Sarbanes-Oxley and some of the other current regulations and laws.
Mm-hmm. And also, as part of the task force, basically you're reporting back to GOP leadership in October. Have they asked you to look into any particular areas of cybersecurity? And when you report back to them this fall, what are they going to be doing with the feedback that you'll be giving them?
They did give us 4 specific areas that they wanted us to consider. One is critical infrastructure. One is information sharing. Another is laws that need to be updated. And the fourth one is authorities issues, and there we're talking about a fair number of national security related type authorities. So those are 4 areas that they've laid out. There may be others. There wasn't exclusive. And really it's going to be up to them on what they do with the recommendations. But the hope is that we take this kind of cross-committee framework without writing the details of the legislation, but we set that up, but that enables the individual committees to move out in their piece of jurisdiction under that framework and consistent with that framework. Meanwhile, as they write the legislation, you're going to have this bipartisan approach, talks with the White House, and considering what the Senate approach is. That all has to come together through the process.
Some of the committees that will be active on cybersecurity in the House include the Armed Services. Mac Thornberry serves on that committee. In fact, he's chair of the subcommittee on emerging threats and capabilities. Homeland Security, Energy and Commerce, Intelligence, Oversight and Government Reform, and Judiciary. Now, Congressman, just to follow up on Jennifer's question, if you're reporting back in October, what do you think could possibly be passed with regard to cybersecurity legislation in this Congress?
Well, there are 2 or 3 pieces of legislation already moving in the House that touch on cybersecurity. I think a subcommittee of Energy and Commerce has already reported out a data breach bill. We have a couple provisions in Armed Services. The Science Committee just approved last week a bill related to cybersecurity. So things are moving. Again, I think the hope is that with this framework, over the next year and a half, we can make substantial progress in a variety of areas, but not put all. My preference, personally, would be not to put all our eggs into a single 2,000-page bill that you have to ram through and nobody knows what's in it. I don't think there's a very good history of that sort of approach.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Martinez.
And then the budget crisis has consumed Washington for months, as you know. Mm-hmm. How do you think that's going to impact the types of bills coming through the House? And also, the House GOP freshmen have made it very clear that they're against anything that's going to increase spending. Do you see that as a possible issue going forward as these various committees are looking at cyber legislation?
No, I think you're exactly right. It will be an issue going forward. So a lot of people perhaps would like to have more federal research in cybersecurity. If so, the question is, how do you pay for that? The incentives that we were talking about, some of them may be tax incentives, may have a cost to the federal treasury, or at least CBO would score them that way. That may make them more difficult to accomplish. So cybersecurity, like every other issue in Washington right now, is going to be constrained by the tight budgets that we all face. I think that's absolutely true.
And in fact, the National Journal reports that the Pentagon's budget for 2012 includes $2.3 billion for protecting against cyber attacks. And OMB estimates that total government spending on information security this year will be about $12 billion. Jennifer Martinez, we have time for one more question.
Okay. Well, since you're the vice chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I wanted to ask you about the Pentagon's recent release of its first formal cyber strategy. And in that, they did not give a very clear-cut definition for what an active war is in the digital age and what type of a cyber attack would warrant a physical or kinetic response. Were you disappointed that they left that question unanswered, and how important do you think it is for the Pentagon to be spelling out what an active war is in the digital age?
I was somewhat disappointed at the vagueness of the strategy. I don't know that any of us should expect the Pentagon or anybody else to come up with definitive answers to some of these very hard questions, because they are difficult. In our first hearing in our Armed Services Subcommittee this year, I tried to pose the question this way. We know what we expect the Department of Defense to do if a bunch of planes come to bomb a refinery in the Houston Ship Channel. What do we expect the federal government to do if it's a bunch of packets coming to bomb that same refinery in the Houston Ship Channel? What is the government and particularly the military's responsibility to defend private business and facilities in cyberspace? We don't know. So I didn't really expect the Pentagon to come up with definitive answers, but I think it's very important that we grapple seriously with these issues, and that particular strategy was more vague and didn't advance the ball as much as I would like. At the same time, Secretary Lynn has been very helpful in putting forward ideas and strategies to help defend the country, and so some of his speeches maybe have advanced things a little further than this strategy did.
Congressman Mac Thornberry is a Republican from Texas, chairman of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities, and chair of the House Republican Task Force on Cybersecurity. Thank you for being on the Communicators. Up next, Congressman